Feel the deal. Feel it. Feel the deal today with affordablemobiles.co.uk.
Two young men have died on e-scooters in Britain in as many weeks. The latest fatality announced this afternoon was of 19-year-old George McGowan in Portsmouth. A 20-year-old died in Wolverhampton last week. Every death produces more calls for e-scooters to be more tightly regulated or banned altogether. Yesterday, the Deputy Mayor of Paris threatened to ban e-scooters following the death of a 31-year-old pedestrian who'd been walking alongside the River Seine. Following an initial trial in Middlesbrough, dozens of British towns and cities now allow users to hire e-scooters. You'll need at least a provisional licence, take a admittedly very easy online safety test, be over 18 and have a smartphone app to unlock the scooter. People who use one for the first time say they're surprised how heavy they are. Speed is limited, typically to around about 15 miles per hour. E-scooters are classified as personal light electric vehicles. As such, their use is governed by the, if you're interested, the 1988 Road Traffic Act, which means if, for instance, you jump a red light, you'd get 3 points on your licence, just as if you were driving a car. Riding on pavements is illegal. That all sounds reasonable, doesn't it? And a good way of cutting down traffic by getting people out of their cars. By their very nature, scooters are more COVID safe than buses or trains, so there's a lot to like. There's a lot to dislike too. It's not so much the legal rental scooters, it's the fact that tens of thousands of e-scooters, we have no idea how many frankly, have been sold into private hands. Legally, private e-scooters can only be ridden on private land, but chances are that many of the e-scooters you may have seen, or indeed dodged out of the way of, were not, or were purchased, not actually rented. Certainly many of the 200 plus injuries involving e-scooters did not involve regulated rentals. They were privately bought or sometimes just stolen. Critics also say they are increasingly the travel mode of choice for phone snatchers and muggers. They're banned from pavements, but how do you find someone riding recklessly on the pavement on a private scooter with no means of identifying who they are? Charities representing blind pedestrians say they are nothing short of a menace, and there are plenty of people who agree with that sentiment. We have been asking on Twitter how you felt about the idea of an e-scooter ban. In 3 hours. Over 15, that was taken from a little earlier on, but now 757 votes, correction, with 6 minutes left on that poll, and the proportions are still as there actually. 3/4 of people favour some type of prohibition and 1/4 are against a ban. Well, joining me now, Matthew Scott, Police and Crime Commissioner for Kent, and also Shazad Shah, who's in charge of strategy and communication at Ridables. That's an advocacy group which campaigns to make e-scooters a legitimate form of transport on Britain's roads. Gentlemen, a very warm welcome to both of you. Matthew Scott, if I may start with you, where do you stand on this?
Well, personally, I would ban private e-scooters. I think they have become a menace. I think they're being improperly used on a more widespread scale than people care to admit. And every private e-scooter rider doing so in public is inconsiderate because they're breaking the law. Of course, we have these hire schemes going on at the moment, but sadly, people have started to lose their lives. Not only are people dying, but they're being seriously injured by e-scooters, both riders and pedestrians as well. I think we need to take the opportunity to nip this in the bud and just say no to private e-scooter sales.
Shazad, the fatalities are beginning to mount, aren't they? That's unignorable.
Yeah, you could say that as well, but you could also put it in proportion for the number of rides that we've had. I think it's like 5 million miles has been, 5 million journeys have been done on e-scooters. We're likely to see some accidents on those in the same way that we would have with cyclists and drivers.
Yeah, I mean, Matthew, that's also indisputable, isn't it? I forget what the exact figures are, but it's something like 2,000 motorists a year and motorcyclists a year lose their life on British roads. The very act of travelling carries some risk.
You're correct, but we do have in place quite strict controls around other forms of transport, and we also have the infrastructure for them as well. We don't have that with private e-scooters. We don't have the mass public education campaigns which have gone along with safer cycling and encouraging people to drive safely and not speed. It just hasn't been there. What we've got is mixed messages, that people are seeing the hire schemes, they're thinking it's acceptable to buy private scooters. Some retailers are being responsible about it, but if you go onto Amazon, for example, and look at the many adverts on there for private e-scooters, they're not giving the legal warnings which are correct. So we've got real problems here, I think.
Shazad, you've got a problem, haven't you? And it's, in a sense, it's not your problem. A lot of people are in favour of private rentals. What they've got a problem with is the unregulated stuff out there. It's a good idea that's going to bad, either because the enforcement authorities aren't making sure the law's applied properly, or people are just taking advantage of what they see as a temporary loophole.
Well, you're right. The problem we've got at the moment is what we're seeing, and generally most of the incidents we're having are based on short-term rentals, where people are getting on a scooter without any experience, sometimes intoxicated, riding in tandem. When you compare that with people that are of a certain responsibility level, I'm not going to base it on age, they have a very different stance on it. They ride responsibly, or most of them ride responsibility, and it's down to these short-term rentals that are having a completely different effect. Obviously, it comes across more negative, as we see on the news, but in reality, they have a lot more benefit as well. But I think the challenge is really around the short-term rentals.
Well, just on that, Shazad, I mean, you raise an interesting point there. I mean, is that what's happening here? Are you effectively getting joyriding going on by people who just see them, they've got their smartphone, let's have a go, maybe they've had a drink, it ends badly?
Yeah, we talked about the recent incident as well, where there was the two people on the scooter. I forgot the gentleman's name. I think it was in Liverpool. He was riding with a person at midnight. He was drunk, and obviously he had some points on his license, and that's exactly what should be happening. If you're driving a vehicle, riding a vehicle, or even riding a bike intoxicated, you should be mature enough to make a decision that this is not safe for me to do that, and certainly not take a passenger and ride more responsibly.
Matthew Scott, I mentioned in my introduction that the Deputy Mayor of Paris is looking hard now at some kind of change in what has hitherto been a fairly liberal attitude in that city towards the rental of scooters, that in the wake of the death of a 31-year-old pedestrian who was just walking along the banks of the River Seine and lost her life following a collision with a rental scooter with two people on board it. If Paris can look at a ban, should London?
Yeah, I think so. We've got evidence of not just private e-scooter misuse, but rental e-scooter misuse as well. I know there have been cases elsewhere in the country, but Kent Police are having to do enforcement days of action now, specifically with regards to e-scooters, because it's now putting a burden on them. The amount of antisocial riding on the on the hire scheme, as well as the irresponsible behaviour on the private scheme, is placing a burden on policing as well. I think the government can and should pause the rollout of any further trials. I think they should consider ending any trials which they've got going on at the moment. I know that's more difficult to do, but we should definitely not be rolling this out any further until we've done a proper full safety review of this.
And not just, presumably, Matthew, a full safety review, but if the law isn't to be made an ass, the police need to make sure that they do a sweep and make sure that if they find people riding illegally, people who've bought private e-scooters that can only, theoretically at least, be used on private land, good luck with that, then they make sure they're taken off the streets.
You're quite right, and the Metropolitan Police, I know, did a big campaign on this very recently where they took 500 off the streets. My own police force in Kent is seemingly taking these off the streets every week. One police officer I spoke to in another police force, he himself took 8 off the streets in a very small police force area in the north. So the police are using their powers, but at the same time, do we want the police having to deal with this problem when they've got other issues to be dealing with?
Shazad Shah, final point really. I mean, I know 15,000 respondents on a Twitter poll isn't wholly representative, but it's not a tiny sample. And it was 3/4 for a ban and 1/4 for keeping things as they are. It's not encouraging from your perspective.
No, I fully get that. And if it's the final point, the point to mention is look at the positive sides of things. Look at the targets that we have as a country to reduce emissions, to reduce congestion, to be more hygiene friendly based on COVID. Think about what we're trying to encourage more, improve mental health, being more outdoors, and just making sure that London is a leader in electric and alternative fuels, really, because at the moment where we're going is driving too many cars is just not sustainable. And what we need to look at is a way of either regulating this and managing it, because it needs to be regulated, because we don't want to give the police an extra burden. equally, we need to recognise that there's far more benefits in riding these vehicles and owning these vehicles than having them. And unfortunately, it's only the negatives that get more portrayed in the news because obviously it's more interested. But in reality, these things are here to stay. We are the UK. We are leaders in technology and leaders in infrastructure. We need to pave the way like it's been done in many places in Europe, certainly in the US, where not just short-term rentals, but also owned vehicles are being allowed. We as a country need to recognise that is something that needs to be done and is going that way. Do we spend more time in policing the ones that are owning those vehicles, or do we spend more time in regulating it and making sure that the government makes some benefit from it in terms of some revenue, but equally we make a safe system and we leverage what we've got on the cycle infrastructure at the moment for the gain of making our country great, green, environmentally friendly and less congested.
You make a good point. It's only ever newsworthy with a very much deep for your time this evening. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Well, if you